recognized as one of the top instructors in DC. He currently serves as the senior pastor of Dominion Life Center and volunteers as the mental health coordinator for the DC Baptist Convention, serving 168 member churches and approximately 80,000 congregants. He is a graduate of Paul Lawrence Dunbar Pre-Engineering High School in DC and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Biblical Studies from Faith Christian University and Schools. Javon is a certified emergency response chaplain, Darkness to Light facilitator, grief support specialist, human behavior personality development specialist, life and leadership coach, mortgage loan officer, and an ordained pastor. He's the proud father of 4 amazing children, Jasmine, Kayla, Jackson, and Lauren. Without further ado, I'll bring up Pastor D.
All right, thank you, D'Angelo. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm grateful for all who are responsible for being here today. We're going to try to shorten my presentation for our time together today and hopefully give you a little bit of information regarding what I do and what we do in mental health first aid. And how do I advance the slides? Let's see. All right, so D'Angelo has already given you much of an introduction regarding the work that I do and who I am and some of the experiences that I have, but it is a very rewarding work and what I have an opportunity to do in that I am not a clinical professional. I am not a mental health professional in that regard, so I'm a non-clinical mental health educator, and part of my role is to help equip the community and help equip others, whether you are clinical or non-clinical, to recognize signs and symptoms. Then we equip you with an action plan to be able to support folks in the experience of mental health challenges, or unfortunately, when they're experiencing a mental health crisis. So with all of my trainings, it's very important that we do set a comfort agreement, some basic ground rules based on the nature of what we discuss. The topic can land very personally with many others, and others may be heightened in some ways. So confidentiality is always important, just because, again, the nature of the topic, it often compels individuals to share from their personal experience and their personal stories. So I always want to create a safe space for that. So I want to make sure that we are honoring confidentiality. If anyone is heightened by any part of the conversation today or needs some support, please reach out. However, it is via chat, email, phone call, whatever that may be. That's absolutely important to keep in mind. We'll make sure that we do create a respectful environment. What I've learned from teaching this is that there's a range of knowledge and experience in this particular area. So sometimes when I'm teaching, I have a psychiatrist who's sitting beside someone who says, my brother lives in mental health, and I don't know anything about it. And I just want to kind of grab that understanding. And so that's the power of our program, that all people come to our program for life. But I ask everyone to be present as we engage in the conversation today. So one of the things that will help me get started and what we talked about in mental health first aid, and I think this is critical to initially start this conversation, is that we all have mental health. Everyone in the world has mental health. And so looking at the continuum, we're all somewhere on this continuum regarding our mental health. So perhaps we're healthy, which we all describe as being well. We may be perhaps experiencing some stress or some initial challenges that are moving us to a state of maybe becoming unwell. Perhaps we're actually unwell. And so in that unwell status, there may be a diagnosis and there may not be a diagnosis. I'm feeling really comfortable teaching here this afternoon because one of the questions that we really push out there is how long do you think the average adult American waits before getting help? So that diagnosis and undiagnosed terminology when we think about this, which we talk about in our class. So we look at when symptoms begin to the time a person reaches out for help for the first time, how long does the average adult American wait? Well, according to the statistics that we have, the average adult American waits 10 years before getting help. That's quite a bit of time. One of the analogies that we use is if I were to fall down a flight of stairs and twist my ankle, I wouldn't wait 10 years if I was walking around there after having that type of injury. And so mental health first aid excels as an early intervention program that we want to connect others with help more sooner. than later. Now, that statistic that I just gave, about 10 years, for communities of color, anytime we have statistics, we know that those statistics usually land with us 3 times higher than the national averages. And so often in the communities of color, it can be 30 years before a person would reach out for help. Unfortunately, sometimes without getting that help and intervening early, a person may experience a mental health crisis. I'm going to touch on some of those in just a little bit. And one of the great things and one of the core values of mental health first aid is that we teach that recovery is possible. So although a person may live with a mental health challenge, recovery is possible. One of my colleagues often says it's not something that we hope for. Recovery is something to be expected. So once we're able to connect a person with services, getting a proper diagnosis and a proper treatment plan, that person goes and live a very full, free, and satisfying life. I'm often asked, Javon, what inspired you to do this? Do you have a clinical background? Not really. Just took a lot of classes and kept up with a bunch of different certifications and things that were thinking for me personally. And that's because I'm also a person with big experience. My first suicide attempt, I was 15 years old. Living in our challenges for maybe 15 years before reaching out for help the very first time. And there have been 6 suicide attempts in my life. And so I committed myself now to having this conversation and breaking the stigma and encouraging others to reach out for help and then being equipped to help others who may be experiencing challenges. And so it's through this course that I felt empowered to even share that story, because for many years, I identified with those who suffer in silence, but still embarrassed to tell others about that journey. And so we have experienced a global traumatic event over the last 3 years. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a traumatic experience, and traumatic experiences are major factors in developing mental health challenges. So one of the questions that I want to pose tonight is just asking the group and kind of polling the room, and if someone is monitoring the virtual chat room, if anything drops there, we'd love to know what are some things that you're beginning to see. They say we're moving into an endemic, right? That the major threat is over, but then I saw another article from the World Health Organization that says, no, we're still very much in the pandemic. What are some of the challenges we began to see in the last 3 years or so? Things that you may be aware of that are starting to shift, whether in your own personal life or those that you're personally connected with, or in the community. Yes.
I feel like when we first hit the pandemic, a lot of resources were free. I won't say freely, but given out more easily than they would have been pre-pandemic. Stimulus checks, PPP loans, more access to easier access to healthcare, testing, not experience of government, very helpful in some places. And now I feel like we're going to a spot where they're trying to make you forget all that. We can't actually give these resources too much. We can't offer you healthcare as easy as we did. It's kind of we can't make this a consistent thing. We have to make this. That was just a pandemic thing. Now we have to go back to normal. But I feel like the pandemic is supposed to teach us that it really wasn't the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, wow. The pandemic itself, as you shared, there were many resources that our communities desperately needed before the pandemic, right? But because it affected all people, now we're releasing these resources, and it's almost as if we're going to give these resources, as you said, now we're going to take those resources back. Coupled with the isolation and the loneliness that many folks felt, during the time where we had to really socially distance, that definitely has increased mental health concerns, because the lack of financial stability itself is a risk factor for developing mental health challenges. There's a strong correlation between money and mental health that sometimes we don't talk about, but on both sides of that coin, our mental health can affect money, and then money can affect our overall mental well-being. It's one of the areas of wellness that Sandra talks about. Yes.
Yeah, and sort of coupled with that, equity and access issues, because I think even from a business standpoint, the way that healthcare is being modernized is available, technology-wise, technology is increased exponentially, there is an availability, but for certain individuals who have to access that. I think that from an equity standpoint, usually it's a lot of Black and brown and other minority people who are disadvantaged in being having even with like internet access or money access. Like, I think about that especially because I feel like as a society we're only as good as what we're providing to people that are experiencing the worst of the worst. But the umbrella kind of covers the higher tiers of those who can.
Absolutely. So we do see those disparities. That's another thing that we talk about. What are some of the barriers to getting help? What are some of the hurdles that many will have to kind of overcome to get help? Finances and insurance becomes one of those challenges. And then within the professionals, we encourage appropriate professional help as part of our action plan. But one of the challenges we begin to see is there's not enough professionals to then respond to the needs that are in our communities. And so how I can then use other parts of our action plan, like encouraging appropriate encouraging self-help and other support strategies, then I can empower the individual to take agency over their mental well-being. And there's some things that we can do ourselves while we're waiting for the professional help. So we're not saying we choose the professional help, but until we can connect others with the professional help, there are things within our wheelhouse that we can do. One of the activities that we focus on, having those that are supported to identify people, programs, and activities. So who are the people in our life that can help us? Again, looking at those non-clinical individuals in our life that can help. It can be something as simple, people say, well, I get a massage once a month. And we'll be amazed at something as simple as a massage, meeting with a nutritionist. Some of our grocery stores, many people don't know it, but some of our grocery stores have nutritionists who are in place while the store is open, who can give advice around nutrition. But then, even where we are today, over here in Ward 8, there's one grocery store to serve the entire ward of over 7,000 people. So when we talk about access to some of those basic resources, again, it contributes to the increase that we see. But we do recognize, and I talk about this freely in our classes, we do recognize that there's more need than there are professionals that can help. And so helping those who take our courses, and even as I spoke from work that I do in other circles, exploring other things that can be put in place until we can get folks connected to that help. Reducing those risk factors and raising our protective factors. Definitely something that can be helpful. I think I saw something jump off on the chat. I'm not sure if it was someone responded.
Folks just saying greetings.
Just saying greetings. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on in the interest of time. There's a few things that I do want to definitely talk about. One of those risk factors are adverse childhood experiences, and some of us may have heard the term ACEs. But these are 10 potentially traumatic events that can occur in a person's childhood. And the more of these a person experiences, the more likely it is they will develop a mental health challenge at some time in their life. And so a lot of things we kind of understand things like physical abuse or physical neglect, but sometimes we overlook an experience like emotional neglect. So that's when a child is not receiving that emotional support that they would need from their parental or caregiving environment. So you may have some young people who don't have parents that tell them that they love them regularly, or those who may not embrace them with hugs. And then particularly outside of mental health first aid, I teach another course on the psychological development of boys or men in the United States. And particularly, we are a demographic where when it comes to emotional neglect, we are not taught to be in touch with our emotional selves. And so our emotional intelligence, usually there's a struggle there, and then also with emotional regulation. And all of that can contribute to developing a mental health challenge. And sometimes it also manifests as physical challenges as well, especially with gastrointestinal issues and some other things. And then also having household members who suffer or live with mental health challenges. We understand also in many of our communities, having a household member who's incarcerated affects mental health challenges. So again, as we start to go through this list, thinking about our own lives and those around us, the more of these that we begin to check off, that means the more likely it is that we will develop mental health challenge, either in our youth or in our adult life. But definitely that becomes a major risk factor. Another factor would be community experiences. And so there are shared experiences that we often have in our community. So I'll touch on this a little bit, economic instability, but there are high concentrations of economic instability in our communities, we see several things happen. And so a lot of people, especially in DC now, they're complaining about how the crime rates have increased. And so one of the things we simply say, well, people are hungry, people are sick, people are trying to make ends meet, and there's not enough employment or other challenges that are going on at the community level. So what do hungry people do? They turn to desperate measures. So there's a lot of things that we're starting to see in our communities that become community trauma or traumatic events that increase mental health challenges, such as community violence and other losses within our communities as well. So again, we're starting to see an increase of these things quite a bit, and there's a lot of conversation around these things that all contribute to developing mental health challenges. I'm gonna kind of push us on. So I also ask this question often: where do people in our communities turn when they're facing a psychological or mental health challenge? Turn to church, especially those who are faith, traditions, and practices. Where else do we turn? Social media, your family, friends,
Romantic partner.
Schools. So look for those institutions in our community, Christian schools, family. Think of the obvious things that we often turn to. I'm going to try. Yeah, it's there. So we turn to family and friends, we pick up the phone, we call someone else, we meet with them, we turn to church, schools, those institutions. But a lot of times we turn to substances and alcohol use. There's a rise and increase, especially in cannabis use. And that contribute to, these are actually mental health disorders. And often what we found is that 8 times out of 10, when there's a substance use, alcohol use, cannabis use disorder, there's an underlying mental health challenge. And the person is attempting to self-soothe. And so, again, another place where our program kind of points out how we can support others and reducing that stigma around substance, alcohol use, and other chemicals that they use, others that they use to support. So, we talked about a little bit of some of the risk factors. We also cover recognizing signs and symptoms, and that is extremely important. Signs and symptoms may manifest over 4 different domains in a person's behavior, appearance, emotions, and their thinking or cognitive and how they processing information. And depending upon your role in a person's life and what season you encounter a person, you may see signs and symptoms in different places. One of the things that I often talk about is the longer you spend with a person, the more time you spend with them, the more conversation you have with them, it's like pulling back the layers of the onion, you start to understand more. And so another discipline I talk about there is the expected you and the real you. Well, most of the time when we show up in settings like this, it's the expected version of ourselves. But if we sat and we talked for maybe 30 or 45 minutes, we begin to pull down the facade, who we genuinely are begins to show, we feel a little more comfortable, we get a little more vulnerable, and we may start to share some things and we notice these signs and symptoms. So as I said earlier, that early intervention is going to lead to a better outcome. And signs and symptoms, thinking about early intervention and why that's important, because signs and symptoms can also appear rapidly or they can appear over long periods of time. So the sooner we're able to develop, notice those signs and symptoms, often the better outcome for those that we may be supporting. All right, if I had a little more time, I was going to run us through one of the activities that we use, run through the alphabet A, B, C. What are some signs and symptoms that we notice? And so I hear angry, bored, crying, distressed, and start going through the alphabet. And the purpose of that activity is to help us to realize that some signs and symptoms we're already aware of. So in our program, we do not teach to diagnose, and that's really important to mention here. We do not teach that recognizing signs and symptoms now will be put to diagnose, but we're looking for baseline changes and clusters of things that can be different over those 4 domains that I just mentioned. And then we engage in a conversation providing support and being a link to services wherever possible. Part of that includes our ability to then develop have access to a resource list, but then also developing our own resource list that we can use when supporting others. And we'll often talk about that. Some of the common illnesses that we've heard of: depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or the psychotic disorders, eating disorders, something that we often don't talk about, And that affects both male and female. Often we don't talk about how eating disorders affect men, and then post-traumatic stress disorder or other trauma and stress-related disorders as well. So we cover those in our curriculum. And so I kind of talked about this a little bit, we kind of got some feedback. But what are some things that make it hard for us to get help? I think we touched on these. The cost of mental health care. What happens when a person doesn't have health insurance? Many providers now are cash pay only and no longer accept insurance. And I've asked some of them, what's going on? They say it's too many hurdles working with the insurance companies. Or the insurance companies will only allow so many providers within a mile radius, so many miles radius. And so they said, I can't get into the network. The network is already filled. And so they say I have a better opportunity, offer my services for cash payment. Well, what does that do for those in our communities who cannot pay for their appointments out of pocket? So there are some programs that I will talk about. One that offers virtual services, BetterHelp.com, they may offer financial services, but still that person will still have to come up with maybe $194, $196 per month. But for some people, they may be able to reach that, or they may have family members to say, okay, I can sponsor you for 2 or 3 months. These are some of the critical conversations that I have with those that I support, trying to figure out how to gain access to the services. Yes.
Can I just say, I work in schools and colleges, so I have a family business and providers and
But even in my own experience, looking for a therapist when I moved to the area, I've been blown away by how many providers are out-of-network providers. And so there's a process where you have to pay up front, and then they'll give you like a ticket to get reimbursed later by your insurance company. That was new to me coming here. I was so used to when I was in Ohio, my home state of Arkansas, most providers took their insurance immediately. So when you're showing up, they're charging you $10, $20 straight from your card or checking account. But up here, so many providers are out there, especially the so-called top of the line providers. So I know they can get very, very appealing to DMV, just finding those who can start and not worry about money up front.
Absolutely. Which is why the telehealth option has become so much more popular. Because if I can't meet with someone within 5-10 mile radius, I can be connected with someone 3 hours away. And still get access to the services that I need. But as you mentioned, there's still barriers. Do I have access to Wi-Fi? Do I have a private place in my home where I can actually have an appointment and share with a professional? Then also awareness. Many people don't see mental health they don't see it as a mental health challenge at all. But many, this is how I choose to live my life. A lot of times when I'm teaching for our fire EMS module with our first responders, and I get to talking about alcohol use and binge drinking, the room gets really uncomfortable because they don't see their drinking as problematic. This is just a part of our culture. We had a tough shift, we're going to go to happy hour, and so what? I drink more than 5 drinks in one setting. Well, 5 drinks in one setting is considered binge drinking. And when you do that for 3 or 4 times a week, that can be considered problematic drinking. And I just shared with you there may be some underlying challenges that others may be attempting to self-soothe. So they may not even see it as a mental health challenge at all. We talked about logistics and then support. We talk about family, friends, significant others. There's some people who don't have that support. And I think we often make the assumption that there has to be somebody in this person's life. Well, I usually push back in some of my classes and say, you might be that somebody to care, to show compassion and empathy where others may not have that. And then overall is the fear and stigma. There's a lot of negative language that we use around mental health. And in mental health, I say we try to champion person-first language, but even that has its nuances. There are some communities that don't like person-first language, and I'd rather be identified by my illness. And so how do we navigate that cultural dynamic across the board when it comes just to the language we use? Some of the examples I give off in my class, we may say things like the weather's been bipolar. How might that land someone who lives with a bipolar disorder? How might they be affected by hearing us, refer to the weather that way? People say, oh, don't mind me, that's just my ADHD bothering, or, that's my OCD kicking in. You don't have a diagnosis of these illnesses. How does that land with a person who may live with that? And then, not going to share it tonight, but there are all types of terms that we use for those who live with mental health challenges that can be very derogatory. So then what happens to an individual who is living with that challenge, I'm not gonna talk about it. I don't need shame for this. I don't want others to treat me different or look at me different because I live with a challenge. So we're trying to reduce that fear and break the stigma in our communities as well. So what happens if a person delays treatment? They can kind of jump the gun on this a little earlier and talk about that delay. He's like, give that statistic there. But what happens if a person doesn't get treatment? Often in our communities, we believe, oh, they'll get better, it'll change. That's not often the case. They continue to move down that continuum that I showed you earlier, and it gets worse. And often it's not until this crisis moment when the help is then offered, but we could have intervened much sooner than that. Here's something that I grabbed from our conference a few weeks ago. So, what do you think would happen in our country if one commercial passenger plane crashed every day?
People will stop flying.
People would stop flying. We try to understand why is the plane crashing every day, right? What if 2 commercial passenger planes crash every day and every soul on board perished? We would be devastated as a nation. Okay? We would look at what systems are called, what's happening to cause these planes to crash. Well, that information is equivalent to the number of people who die by overdose and the number of people who die by suicide and eating disorders every day. But there's not that same outrage. There's not this deep look into the systems that are causing or contributing to individuals kind of sliding down that spectrum to experience these crises. Not until we know someone who's passed by overdose, or we know someone who has died by suicide. One suicide affects at least 180 people. It's 180 people are affected by one person who dies by suicide. So if that becomes a risk factor for that 188 people as well, to have someone that they care about who has ended their lives and died by suicide. So just kind of putting into perspective some of those things. We talk about suicidal thoughts and behaviors, that's not the only crisis. Non-suicidal self-injury or self-injurious behavior is not immediately considered a crisis, but it can become a crisis, especially when it may become a medical emergency. Most consider non-suicidal self-injury as a coping mechanism, but still, that can be pretty scary to see a family member who would be engaged in that behavior. Panic attacks and things that we talk about, also aggressive and disruptive behaviors. Often when we see aggressive and disruptive behavior, we believe, oh, this person is violent, but aggression and violence are not the same thing. And what can make a person become aggressive? Fear. It's a typical trauma response, fight, flight, or freeze. And what may a person be afraid of? The signs and symptoms of it. I don't feel like myself. This doesn't feel normal. Especially when we talk about things like psychotic disorders. I'm hearing voices that can make that person afraid. Does anyone else hear what I'm hearing? Right? Or if they're experiencing some delusions. And then again, we talk about overdose. So glad to hear that y'all already had the locks on training, because I'm always on my soapbox about that, because that's definitely training that we need to have. And I believe every institution, every building where there are people going in and out, someone needs to be trained in that building with Narcan, and everyone who works in that facility needs to know where the Narcan will be, who has access, because this doesn't have just one face, it's not just one color, it's not one social economic group. Mental health affects all people across the board, so we have to also take away those assumptions when we say, okay, that doesn't happen to people that look like me, that only happens to them or others. It happens all across the board. So how can we help? More about mental health first aid. Our certification course, we offer mental health first aid for adults and assist other adults. Youth mental health first aid is designed for adults and assist adolescents. And then we have teen mental health first aid that is designed for high school, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, those concerns amongst their peers. They connect their peers with trusted adults. The teen mental health first aid program is only taught in schools and youth serving organizations. But then we also have community-specific courses as well, where we focus on higher ed, first responders, military families, older adults, and even have mental health first aid for Spanish speaking communities as well. because we know that there are significant challenges among those Spanish-speaking communities, and from what I understand, they are developing curriculum in other languages as well. What do we cover in general? Again, as I talked about today, those common signs and symptoms of illness, mental illness, and substance use. We focus a lot on how we can connect that person with help, and how do we support a person who may be experiencing a crisis. And we use what we call an allergy action plan to do that. And we also will talk about creating a self-care action plan, even for the first aider. So we really hone in on the need for us to take care of ourselves. And as a statement we say in the class, it's better that we take care of ourselves than we can take care of others. I say, well, whether you take care of others or not, it's really important that you take care of yourselves and look at those 8 dimensions of wellness that Sasha provides for us. And develop a self-care plan and make sure you're touching each one of those areas of wellness. I say to my first aiders at least once a month. And if you are high achieving first aider, do something once a week for yourself in each one of those categories. Because we don't want to wait till you're overwhelmed or burned out until you move out of that spectrum to then practice self-care. This should be something that we're doing regularly. Now, I was sharing with them that were asking about my day. So I was taking a class today on the neuroscience of coaching. As a life coach, you have to continue your education. And I was being coached today, and I said, well, I need to get my physical fitness. That's the one area of self-care where I struggle with the most. And she said, well, John, do you eat every day? Stop, I'm hungry. Something simple as eating every day. That's a form of self-care that we overlook. But then I stopped and said, you know what? I need to probably pay attention a little bit more to what I'm eating and what I'm consuming. So mental health first aid has helped to shape that for me. Those who take the course, yes, it equips us with the action plan to help. But the evidence shows it also helps to reduce our participants their own psychological distress as well. So it's a dynamic program, and I stand behind it, not just because I teach and train instructors. We've actually seen the program change lives. One of the most rewarding things is when I get an email or text or a phone call and say, hey, Javon, I took your course yesterday and I helped somebody today. Or sometimes we split it into 2 sessions, and then they say, from the last session to this session, between Tuesday and Thursday, yesterday, someone reached out for help, and just a little bit that I got from that course, I was able to connect that person with some resources that they desperately need. So, thank you all, and I think I'm opening it up. Here's some contact information I'll read up. If anyone wants to reach out, that is my direct cell number. So, if you want to call or text, feel free to reach out, and I guess I'm opening up for questions and answers.
Yeah, I had a question on, brought up like alcohol. I think about like in the space, like I work on the hill and like liquor is involved in everything. I notice, like, I need to not even there, but even in like big corporate jobs, like I have some friends who she mentioned, she was like, have you guys noticed in like the workplace, liquor is involved in everything? Like anytime there's a celebration or like reception, there's always like an outlet to go to. And I feel like for people that are like stressed, it's kind of something to look over. Kind of like how as a society, not saying everybody has done this, but look over like gun violence, especially in schools. Society has kind of looked that over. Suicide as well. That's something that's kind of looked over because I know right now like the teen mental health crisis is really, really bad. So my question is really, how do you think we like enable these things like as a society?
That's a great question. So now we're doing the second edition of the mental health first aid curriculum, which was released in 2020. But the first iteration, we talked about how alcohol use in our culture is more accepted, right? It's affordable, it's easy access to it, it's legal, right? So then it makes it more acceptable. However, alcoholism can have major impacts in a person's life. And so, again, that's when we have to break that stigma and look at whether it is alcohol or some illegal substance, it can still have the same impact in a person's life. That's one of the things that I like about the curriculum, that we don't highlight one particular thing, but we look at the overall ways in which that affects the individual, their families, and the community as well. So you're absolutely right that alcohol is accepted because it's legal, right? then we are starting to see some of those same challenges with the legalization of marijuana across the country, where it's legal, it's becoming more acceptable. Well, on the other side of that, you have younger people beginning to use cannabis early. 11, 8-year-olds who are using cannabis, who are smoking marijuana or weed. That can be a significant risk factor for their neurodevelopment, and also to become a risk factor for developing things like schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders as well. So I'm answering it, and responding by saying it's the cultural piece of this. So we say that the workplace culture, okay, well, this is acceptable. And we don't look at, someone who may be struggling in the workplace with alcoholism because we kind of cover it up and we make an excuse for it. And we say, oh, we just having a good time. But this person may be totally dependent upon that certain substance to survive. We also, when we think about workplace trauma, which is something that we don't really like to talk about, often what happens is when we experience workplace trauma, one person just gets another job and they just move on and never address that toxic environment in the workplace that is contributing to a person's mental well-being where after work. And I say this sometimes in the class, I usually am very open. It sounds different if I say, hey, after this, let's go to happy hour. Or after this, we get in the garage, we're gonna do some lines in the car. Registers different, right? But they still have the same outcomes and the same effects.
We have a question online from Justin Thomas. It's, what are some important considerations for workplaces in creating a mentally healthy environment for employees?
So I do work with one of the government agencies, and wellness in the workplace, I think, is absolutely important to really have those conversations around wellness, what wellness looks like, and then also how to set healthy boundaries in the workplace. I think those two things are really critical. But we really talk about, again, what wellness looks like in the workplace. Make sure all those areas of wellness are available to staff and employees and encouraged, and then those healthy boundaries. I came from a professional background. We were required to take 5 consecutive days off at least once a year. I mean, that was a requirement. Now, one half of that was for auditing purposes, but the other half of that was we want to make sure that folks step away from the workplace for at least 5 consecutive days. Some folks kind of look at me strange when I say, if you have use or lose leave at the end of the year, that means you're not doing something right. Use your leave if you have it. And promoting that type of climate and environment in the workplace, I think, can kind of help with the overall mental well-being.
So my question really is about, I think you said, about the course teachers, both how to interact with other people in crisis, but also goes back to the first slide, which is that we all are someone more. So what happens if excuse me, we are somewhere maybe not at the crisis point ourselves, like we are maybe experiencing something, or interacting with that person sort of triggers a response in us, but we want to figure out how to support, how do we navigate those spaces where we ourselves might be sort of like dealing with something, but then we see someone else that may be dealing with something that could be worse, but we at least know resources that we can give them help, and how do we interact with them resources. Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So we do talk about that. We talk about safety. So in our action plan, the heart of our action plan is the word assess, because we're always making assessments as first aiders. One of those assessments is safety. Not only physical safety, but is this an emotionally safe place for me as a first aider? And if it is not, then we often tell our first aiders, we call it a tap in, I'm going to tap someone else in. So if I feel, if you're experiencing some challenges, but I know I'm not in the right frame of mind, I'm in the right space, I'm gonna call Charles and say, hey, can we have a conversation with his brother and bring someone else in? We also assess to determine if this is a non-crisis or crisis situation. And one of those things that can happen where it starts off as a non-crisis and it can escalate to a crisis. And if you feel unsafe, we teach our first aiders to disengage and then still connect someone else in the conversation.
We have another question online from Dayon Kidd. It's how do you balance being the strong friend and also making sure that you're still taking care of yourself as well. I see myself as an empath because I sometimes put my feelings to the side and put myself in another person's shoes. And while that isn't a bad quality or trait, I forget to check in with myself.
So the last segment in all of our trainings is the self-care segment, which we have a self-care action plan that I just talked about. One of the other things that our self-care action plan includes is identifying a debrief person. So say I'm using mental health first aid, I'm having a reaction, I feel overwhelmed, I feel emotional myself. I have at least 2 or 3 people that I can start to go down the list and say, hey, I used mental health first aid today. I just need to talk, right? So we really promote you putting in place a plan to take care of yourself, and take care of your mental well-being as well while we're supporting others. So we do have an action plan where we really strongly encourage that in the class. And we have a discussion about what that may look like and how that may look different from person to person. And we actually try to encourage you to do that action plan, at least start it while you're in our classes before you do. Because it can have a significant impact on mental well-being while you're caring for others. I mean, we see that in a lot of careers, like emergency room professionals, law enforcement, even clergy. I was shocked. Boston University released a study that said 35% of clergy meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, but we're never going to be helped for it. So we have to take care of ourselves. Can't stress that enough. Take it seriously.
I was gonna say, I love the place we are now with being careful about the language as well. Like what you said, dying by suicide as opposed to committed suicide, just what most of us have said for years and years. One of the misconceptions I always love educating on is bipolar disorder. It's not just being moody, like we talked about earlier. It comes to those components of depression and mania. But I would like to hear more about which misconception you find most rewarding to educate trainers on.
It's the language. And, I have to tell myself I'm not a language police, but like you said, death by suicide, died by suicide. We wouldn't say the person committed a car accident or they completed a stroke, but that's language we use around suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And I think that has been one of the big things that you mentioned that has been very rewarding to just help others find their language. We have an exercise we use called helpful and unhelpful approaches. You know, we have a curriculum that's scripted, and so we have so much time. I always blow the time out of the water for that exercise. I think we should spend maybe 15 minutes. I'll take 40 minutes on that because the approach, how you come to that conversation, is very significant. Because if you don't come to the conversation the right way, it can shut the whole thing down. And in that approach is where I'm building trust with this person. So they trying to fill me out. I'm trying to fill them out to see where this is going to go. So I take a lot of time there. I think that's been very rewarding as well, because we don't know what to say. Someone kind of walk past, you know, we see each other and say, hey, bro, how you doing? Good, man, how you doing? Right, and just kind of go off. But what if someone says, well, I'm not doing really good today? You know, got some bad news yesterday, and I'm not really feeling, you know, up to things like I normally would. And, you know, I just want to go over to MGM and spend every dime I have in my pocket and just blow it all. I'm just tired, right? Oh, okay, man. You know, take care of that. You know, I'm here if you need me. Bro, I need you. I'm kind of crying out for help a little bit. I think also another thing is when we say, oh, this person they just want attention. That's been one of the things as well. This is not an attention seeker, this is attention needed. This person needs attention. And we have different ways of crying out for that help. And I think the last thing that I've kind of mentioned that's been very rewarding for me in this work is helping others to understand the brain of trauma and active trauma that needs to gain a sense of control. I think that's and how the brain continuously tries to protect itself after a traumatic event that can explain behavior that we may say is odd or strange, but really that's that person fighting to live and trying the brain is trying to protect the individual. I think those are some of the most important. It's a hand all over that.
That makes a crazy question. Oftentimes when I read idea of framing of what is usually associated with the approach. How do you strike that balance between, as a pastor, between, which is part of the approach, but at the same time, getting the mental care to encourage that for your congregation? Where's that balance? How's that balance?
All right, that's a whole class in and of itself. I love that question. So again, the organization I serve with, there are over 160 churches. They invite me in all the time. I work with the Archdiocese of Baltimore to see, different backgrounds. I was with the Unitarian Church yesterday, so the faith community is very precious to me. And one of the things that I often talk about in those workshops is how do I want to word this? Who we are, we see the body, but then there are the non-material parts of us. We have the soul and we have the spirit. And when I show up, all of me shows up. And so my spirit is not separate from my soul, which is where the mind and emotion, the will is. And that's not separated from the body, and they're all interconnected together. One of the great preachers in this area says, you don't have a spiritual problem, you don't have a physical problem, it's a soul problem. Because the soul is a part of what drives us in our being and who we are. And so where the spirit connects us with the divine or the deity or however we choose to believe, the spirit is that connection. The body is what connects us to the earth, the hunger, the sun, and all the things in the earth. But the soul is the part where we struggle. It's where we make the decisions. And so when it comes to prayer, sometimes therapy is the answer to prayer. And what I try to do, my best to do, and we used to do this again in our old curriculum, is where we parallel physical illness with mental health challenges, and we say we can't talk about health without talking about mental health. So I can't talk about the body without also talking about the mind. That's become a push, not only in the faith community, but also among physicians. One of the large insurance companies that's invited me to come and do a conversation on, can you help our physicians understand mental health? Because most of the time, physicians focus on the neck down and not brain health. They don't focus on the mental health. They focus on the brain health, but not the mental health, which can, using words, those are two different things. So I think in the faith community, that's one of the things I try to always bring home, that we're all of who we are. So sermons on Sundays, I expose the mental health in the text. I don't know if I really go really far into this, y'all, but in the Bible, particularly, there are so many traumatic events in text. I mean, and we kind of make stories more palatable for younger people, but really thinking about putting that thing into practice. Noah's Ark, for instance. That's a horrible story. Think about being in an ark, the door closes, it begins to rain, natural disaster, you can hear people screaming for life. You spend so many months inside of this structure with animals and only your family. So in some ways that can be like what the pandemic was like for us. So this so much time with our families, and most folks, that caused some significant challenges. But then you come out of that, and you're the only 8 people left on earth. That can be traumatic. And so then the story goes on and talks about how Noah was drunk one night. I remember I was reading, I was like, I understand why he was drunk. I think I can understand that now. And it helped me to then relieve the judgment that sometimes we carry when others, and so I could go all day long. And so for me as a pastor, I preach it on Sundays, create opportunities to talk about it. One of our churches, they actually have a therapeutic center attached to their ministry. So the pastor will preach once a month, and then they have a time limit, an hour and a half after service, where the therapist will then talk about that subject and answer questions and connect with services. So they're not separate. It's all of it is in the time. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Okay, so this ain't here.
You spoke earlier about the transition from pandemic to endemic. One of the things I saw before with a lot of in general, and I'm noticing that seems to shrink as we move further and further from collective pandemic. What are some tips that you have for that nurturing?
It is this.
It's not that brilliant. But try to put yourself in another person's shoes, try to understand. And places where we don't understand, ask and create a safe space for that person to share. So helpful unhelpful approaches is one of the options that says it's hard for me to understand exactly what you're going through. I can see this stressing for you. And I usually stretch that statement out and let's say, it's a little bit more about what you're experiencing. And I try to meet that person. And I encourage others to meet the person where they are. I don't have to approve and agree, but I can acknowledge and accept this is where this person may be. And I really stress that a lot in class. This work is about me. As I said at the beginning, we all have our own experience. But if I'm going to talk to someone using mental health first aid, I'm writing with every assumption that I have. It's a blank slate, and I'm present and engaged with that person right at that moment based on what they're sharing. And that helps me. That person is sharing at that moment, that particular conversation.
Question from the online audience from Craig Sherrod. As men of color, we are conditioned to deal with issues on our own and not seek mental health. This seems to be an extension of the fear/stigma that you mentioned that prevents us from seeking help. What are some tips to have that conversation and encourage a loved one to speak up?
Another part of our action plan is G. That G in our action plan is give reassurance and information. A lot of times when I'm supporting someone who's resistant to the help, I'm giving them a lot of information. Sometimes I may say things to someone like, seeing depression doesn't mean that you're broken or something is wrong with you, which is a lot of the mindset. It can be just a matter of exercising the brain, having someone to talk to about anything you want to talk to them about. You pay them for 50 minutes, talk about whatever you want to talk about, and they have skills that can help you work through some things that I can't help you work through. Because a lot of times others will say, well, I just want to talk to you. And I say, well, no, they're professionals who really are trained that can help you kind of get through some of these places and process things in ways in which I can. We do have a slide in our curriculum that says, what do you do if the person doesn't want help? Well, I encourage them to talk to someone that they trust. And then remaining patient, because that person may not be ready right at that moment, but they, in my experience, they often always come back at some point when they're actually ready to get that help. So it's really just a matter of waiting till that person is ready to take the steps to get the help that they need. But in the meantime, I'm often giving information, making statements, not badgering the person or antagonizing anybody, but I'm often throwing little things out there and saying, you know, hey, I read this or I heard this, and what do you think about this? And allowing them to process that information, beginning to see light bulbs go off, periodically. So try to read as much, study as much, and learn as much as you can, definitely be helpful as well. And if you specifically know the illness or circumstance, that even helps even more. Have a knowledgeable conversation. Any more questions?
Wait,
Okay.
have you done this type of training with like police officers or departments? Like, how do they take it? Because I understand that a lot of times police officers are dealt with these things.
Great question. So, I'm gonna answer your question first, and then I want to share something else in that same vein. So we do have a public safety. I talked about community-specific courses that are offered. We have a public safety course, and I have taught law enforcement across the whole spectrum, even federal courses as well, DEA agents and all. So the beauty of mental health first aid is we approach this conversation from the same level platform for everyone. But in the midst of the conversation, there are some specific things or concerns that they come out. And largely, what I've dealt with in public safety and law enforcement is helping them to break the stigma. Not even amongst others in the community, amongst each other. To see the hurt and pain and the struggle of those that stood alongside, and then speak up and then offer that person help. Because often they need the help, but they won't say anything because they fear some type of penalty. I won't be promoted, or other ramifications if I come out and say, health challenge. But then even in the communities going forward, you know, we help them to empathize and understand, because you say we don't have to train now. The good thing is right here in our area, Anne Arundel County has a globally recognized program, the Crisis Intervention Team is globally recognized for the impact and difference that they make. Many local jurisdictions around the area are developing programs based on their model. So they have crisis informed officers as a team, and they respond to a call with a clinician right away in an unmarked vehicle and a soft uniform, usually khakis and a polo shirt, to respond. And so they are being trained. And so Howard County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, I think Metropolitan Police, Baltimore, they're slowly beginning to develop and implement these trainings. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if it's Anne Arundel County or the state of Maryland released $1 million to train law enforcement officers specifically in mental health response. And mental health per se is one of the programs that is being utilized in that process. So the other piece, I'm trying to stop here. We talk about this in our culture though. We have to consider, as a first aider, I have to consider a person's allyship with uniformed first responders. And so what I mean by that, there are some people within our communities, I can't call 911 to respond to a concern like this, whether it is a police officer or fire ambulance, they would not be open to that call. So one of the recommendations that we use is to call 988, which is now the crisis hotline nationwide. You call 988, text 988, you can jump online and find a 988 chat line, and you can connect with the crisis counselor that way. And usually that's the course of action, especially if we know the person that can heighten or activate by saying uniform responders, you know, answer a call. There are resources, and 988 is pretty cool. You can use it, even if that cell service is not connected to a provider, as long as there's a battery in charge, just like we can dial 911, the person will dial 988, they should ride connected. Now, one of the challenges, however, they will often ping you to the zip code, to the area code that's assigned to the phone number. So then they have to do the work of routing that person to whatever local place where they would be. So they're still working it out. New service that was just released last July, but it's an amazing service. And we tell for even if you don't know what to do as a first aider, just pick up the phone, dial 988, say, hey, I'm here, this person is experiencing whatever it may be, you know, I want to help support, you know, what can I do? And they will guide you through that process as well, even if you don't have any trouble.
Questions or comments? Chat. All right.
Thank you so much.
So we'll take a moment quickly to thank our presenter. First of all, for giving us some talk, but also grateful for your personal journey that you were willing to share with us today. This is just a small token of appreciation from OHL. Hard sometimes with these talks to kind of strike that balance between the clinical and then being down to earth, and I love to use that perfectly. Let's see it. Any words from our chair? Great job again, Christine. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for coming. I do see Brother Larry in the back. I want to go back to what you were talking about, pray. You pushing through. My bishop used to always say back in the day, push, pray until something happens. But he would always say, if I ever had a heart attack on the altar, he said, I want y'all to pray for me, but I want you to call the ambulance first. Then pray. He said, never be so earthly, so heavenly bound that you're no earthly good. So I had to think about that when I was thinking about you there. But my name is Charles James. I am the chair of the C committee alongside my co-chair, Brother Gavin. If you all can give Brother Gavin a hand. We've done an amazing job single-handedly putting this together. This is a wonderful, wonderful event. And just grateful that Brother Gavin was able to lead it for all of you that are here with us today. I'm also the historian for our chapter, Omicron Theta Lambda. And so on behalf of the executive board and our chapter VP, our vice president, and our president, just wanted to thank you, Pastor B, for coming out this evening, sharing your knowledge, your experiences, your subject matter expertise. This is a subject that is very difficult to have the conversation. Just heard Brother Gavin say that, especially for men, women too. But this is a conversation that men have hard times and difficult times having because we don't want to share a lot. We don't want to be very emotional. So having this type of conversation is important and it's critical. It hits every single person that is here today, and it's not hitting you particularly. It's hitting somebody that you know out there. Some of the critical topics that I saw or heard from our Pastor B this evening: where do people turn facing psychological challenges? Recognizing the symptoms and the signs, the cost of getting help, the fear and the stigma, and as well the support. And we don't have all of the answers. Pastor B is able to give us a lot of the answers. We don't have all of the answers, but we're having the conversation. We're getting the conversation started, and that's what's great about this. And that's also what's great about Frat Chat and why we do this. It's us having the discussions, having conversations, equipping people with different topics and knowledge that maybe before you had no idea prior. So we thank you for that, and it just really embodies the reason behind us having this Frat Chat. So again, I personally say thank you for myself, Brother Gavin, and for our executive board for Omicron Theta Lambda, Chapter Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and our chapter in general, fraternity in general, for coming tonight. I also want to thank Texas Comms for helping us out, supporting us this evening. Yes. And just all the brothers that are here, all our guests, all our visitors, whether you're here in person or online. I thank you for that. And again, would you like to close it out, or would you like me to close it out here? Close out here. So with that, again, I say thank you all. I want you to enjoy the rest of the evening. Continue to have a great day on purpose and safe getting home. And always remember, if you don't have an answer, ask someone who does, because someone has the answer to what you're doing. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye. Next virtual.